Chapter 8, Teams and Team Play. Alright, I'm committed to becoming a card counter. One quick question, though. How do I start a blackjack team? You might be surprised how often I'm asked this as a first question. Due to the success of the MIT teams, the Greeks, Highlanders, and even our own church team, people assume that you need a team to effectively get the casino's money. Not so. The majority of my professional card counter friends aren't part of a team. They beat the casinos playing solo with a bankroll all their own. And to be honest, team play is quite worn out and overhyped. That said, there still are good reasons to team up with others. So I'd like to discuss if you should form any sort of partnership or team and why you might, including my experience employing team play at the tables and some considerations on what actually makes for a healthy team. Valid reasons to play on a team. Hey Loudon, I've been so busy running BJA, I realized I miss playing blackjack. I'm thinking about putting together a bankroll and getting back out there, I said to my friend and card counting colleague. Well, you know me, I've never stopped missing it. I have the time to play, but probably not enough of a bankroll on my own to really make it worthwhile. I keep talking to people who are interested in bankrolling me, but it hasn't felt right. Interesting. I have the opposite consideration enough for a bankroll, but between the young family and my BJA responsibilities, I don't know how many hours I can realistically play each month. Would you have any interest in teaming up again? We'd have to work out the details. Loudon tried unsuccessfully to hide his excitement. But yeah, I'm interested. Honestly, I've held off on accepting the offers I've gotten, because I'm most comfortable with what we had with the church team. Enough trust to keep it fun and with plenty of motivation to work. A few weeks later, we agreed to terms we both were happy with and were generating EV together for the first time in a few years. Aside from being mildly heartwarming, this recent exchange illustrates the three most valid reasons to form a team. Pooled resources. Not everyone has the same resources. In the scenario above, I had more access to cash, while Loudon had more time to play. By teaming up, we were more powerful together than alone. An even more valuable reason for pooling money is that by combining bankrolls, you can generate more of with less risk than you can if you play alone. Imagine you and a friend each have $5,000 in perfect card counting skills. You might expect to each generate $10 per hour in EV playing separately. However, if you combine your money into a $10,000 bankroll, you can each generate $20 per hour. The cards, of course, don't know or care who is at the table, so you can each generate EV off the joint bankroll as if one person were playing twice as many hands. The long run is nearer. While I've experienced swings on every team I've been a part of, overcoming variance much faster is a huge benefit in partnering with others. When Loudon and I spoke, one thing that was important to me was getting in enough hours to overcome the inherent fluctuations. With the amount of capital I was considering throwing into my own bankroll, I didn't want it sitting there for months on end while I was waiting to get to the long run. However, since both Loudon and I would be playing and he had twice as much time available as I did, I knew teaming up gave us a great chance of realizing our profits in an acceptable time frame. Camaraderie. Blackjack often feels like a loner's game. No one in the casino understands what you're doing and wouldn't like it if they did. Often your own family doesn't understand what you're doing. Even if they do, they wonder how spending long hours in the casino environment can be good for various aspects of your health. If you do your job well, you get backed off, and the swings can get emotionally rough at times. Playing with other people who are going through the same things as you and are financially interested in you doing well can really take the edge off. A side note here, finding advantage play friends on message boards like the BJA forum can also alleviate this pain point. Questions to answer before teaming up. Is there complete mutual trust in terms of integrity and skills? It's one thing to take your own money into a casino as a card counter. In time, you'll reap what you sow. If you play perfectly with good money management, you make and keep all the profits. If you choose to not play perfectly or to overbet, it will catch up to you financially. Though the feedback loop may take a couple hundred hours, you'll eventually get what you mathematically deserve. It's quite different to play with someone else's money, much less send someone else out to play with your money. It's not like hiring a barista at a coffee shop. No manager is watching the playing decisions and no cameras watch the till. When person A hands person B 5 or 6 figures in cash to count cards, A has to have complete trust in the integrity of B. If your team members don't play exactly how you're paying them to play, you'll never know, but you will pay the cost. Tommy Hyland understood this well. I wasn't so much concerned that they were expert players, he told a blackjack boot camp group. I figured I could teach them to play if they didn't know how already. The main thing was that they had a good reputation. One way Tommy got to know people's character was by spending time with them on the golf course. Golf is helpful in revealing character. If I saw someone moving his ball out of the rough or dropping a ball out of his pocket, he wasn't a good candidate for my blackjack team. So most of my initial people were from the golf course or someone we met through playing golf. Regardless of how you establish trust in a person's character, This remains a huge issue. It's less so when everyone is winning, but when the inevitable losing streak comes along and emotions are pushed to the brink, can you trust that your team members have the skills and integrity to play flawlessly, aggressively, putting the team's interest above their own? The character issue becomes amplified as you add people to a team. Not only do you have to navigate more personalities, goals, and preferences, but as more people become involved, the less ownership each person tends to feel of the whole. Think of it this way: if you're playing with your own money, you bear 100% of the weight of your decisions. If you team up with one other person, you bear 50% of the weight of your decisions. With a large team, each person feels or carries only a minority responsibility in the whole team. This was one of the challenges we faced with the church team. It was so large, with such a massive bankroll, that in many ways it felt unstoppable. At the very least, any one person's results couldn't harm the whole. But for the team to function in a healthy way, each person needed to acknowledge and feel the weight of his interplaying decisions and every minute spent in the casino. What is the leadership management structure? Even the smallest teams require plenty of decision-making and record-keeping. Who decides risk tolerance, bet spreads, chipping procedure, and how to deal with casino heat? The smaller the team, the easier it is to make decisions, but a lot of this comes down to the individual strengths and weaknesses of the people on the team. One person might be naturally organized, while others need to be herded like cats. Some enjoy crunching the numbers and creating policies, while others just want to be out there generating EV at the tables. If you can easily divvy up tasks and responsibilities, then it can be a simple management structure. However, if some members aren't interested in the work behind the scenes necessary to keep the team running smoothly, you'll need to figure out how to compensate those making decisions, training players, maintaining records, and keeping the team healthy. How much they should be compensated depends on how much time and energy it takes. I've been a part of teams with no management cut, a 10% management cut, and a 30% management cut. Each situation was predicated on the necessity and value of management to the success of the team. You need to answer 3 fundamental questions when thinking through what is fair for management. A sense what happens if no one is responsible for these tasks? A sense how much compensation is needed to motivate the right person to take on these tasks? A sense how would this compensation affect everyone else's motivation? How do we determine training standards? If you play on a team, not only do your own skills need to be sharp, you're now financially interested in the sharpness, or lack thereof, of your fellow teammates. Training other players takes skill, time, and energy. Testing players takes time and expertise. Someone, or several people, on the team will have to pay attention to this, and that takes time out of hours. What is the payout structure? I would define a fair team structure as one that motivates all 3 parties: investors, players, and management. If no one is motivated to bankroll the players, the team is dead on arrival. Ideally, the players teaming up can each contribute an equal amount to the bankroll, but that's not always an option. If no one is motivated to play, the team is dead in the water. Players have to get enough of a cut to be motivated to play, even when the team is in the red. If management is necessary and no one is motivated to step up and take on those responsibilities, the team will fall apart for lack of leadership, health, risk mitigation, or quality of play. When Ben and I first teamed up, we split money 50-50 between hours played and money invested. So if we were up $10,000 when we closed a bankroll, we split $5,000 between us, proportionate to how many hours we each played. The other $5,000 was split proportionately to reflect how much we each invested. It was simple, effective, and very little management was necessary. This worked after Jeff joined as well, up until the point at which we formed the Washington Youngbloods. In the years with Sammy, we took 10% off the top to go to management, though everyone was willing to take on a different management role. Even though the money was split among all 4 of us, it at least motivated everyone to contribute to the managerial tasks, whether it was crunching the numbers, record keeping, trip planning, or money management. When we founded the church team, significantly more managerial skills were needed. Ben and I recruited and trained players, created all team policies, were responsible for maintaining a large bankroll, ran all bet spread and risk numbers, paid accountants and lawyers, paid team taxes, funded bankroll dinners and team meetings, dealt with emergencies, and bore the responsibility for $1 million bankroll. If the team was unsuccessful, we took the blame. If the team was profitable, we were paid roughly 30% to cover all of our responsibilities and expenses. Each structure worked for the specific team and its needs. I always prefer simplicity over complexity, but there is no one right answer for who gets paid what. It's all a balance of making sure people are motivated to fund and play on the bankroll and keep the team healthy and moving forward. How to network to form a team. If your eyes haven't completely glazed over from reading about team management, let me suggest some ways you can explore the possibilities of team play. By far my favorite way to form a team is with people I already know and trust. You can train any number of people to play blackjack, but you can't train an untrustworthy person to be trustworthy. One word of advice, though: don't try to talk your friends into getting into card counting. You can share with them that you're learning and you think they might be good at it. But if they aren't interested or self-motivated, they'll be highly unlikely to follow through. If anything, we tried to talk people out of joining the church team. If we couldn't dissuade them, we knew they had a good chance of making it as a pro. Message boards are a second possibility. A number of teams have formed out of our members forum on blackjackapprenticeship.com. However, you want to approach it the right way, which doesn't mean hopping onto our members forum, or any other AP forum, and posting, "I'm starting a team, who wants to join up with me?" That's a great way to attract the wrong type of people. Instead, ask and answer questions when you start posting. Train yourself like a pro and begin networking organically. In time, you'll discover the right kind of people. At that point, you might get together over coffee or a beer. Be cautious, meet in a public space, and take it one step at a time. Maybe you start training together. Give yourself lots of time to get to know prospective team members, their goals, their character, and find out if your personalities mesh. Boot camps are a great place to meet potential team members. This might sound self-promotional, but we've had more than a few people meet at one of our blackjack boot camps and forge alliances. Think about it: if someone is willing to put in the time, practice, and financial resources to get trained by the best, there's a good chance he or she has what it takes to become a pro. Boot camps also provide a safe opportunity to meet face-to-face with other card counters. Again, don't show up and announce, "I'm starting a team. Who's wants in?" Focus on your game and getting to know people. And offer to exchange information with the people you mesh with seems in order. Take things one step at a time. You can also try to join an existing team. This is more of a Hail Mary and isn't an option for most people. Most teams don't recruit openly. If they are taking on new players, you'll probably need a referral of some kind. The kinds of teams that are actively recruiting on message boards or other broadcasting methods may or may not be the kind of team you want to play on. Even if you have perfect skills, you should wonder why they're willing to entertain you as a teammate if you don't have a reputation and no one has vouched for you. Again, act with caution. If you take the plunge and form or join a team, it will likely open up a whole new world of possibilities. It certainly did for me, most notably, the whole team play concept. You know, the MIT stuff, not so much playing on a team as playing as a team. Let's dive into the why, the what, the when, and the how of blackjack team play. Team play, spotter/BP, on the 6-hour drive from Lawrenceburg, Indiana, to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, we decided to play as a team in an attempt to avoid detection. I was elected to fill the role of a big player. To most people unfamiliar with card counting, what they do know comes from the movie 21 or books like Bringing Down the House. These based on a true story accounts have made card counting synonymous with team play. Hollywood has definitely glamorized team play, with beautiful women crossing their arms behind their backs and college students winning every single hand while Lawrence Fishburne chases them from casino to casino. Team play isn't as sexy as it has been made out to be, nor is it my preferred strategy for beating casinos. That being said, we employed it at times to great success, especially with the Washington Youngbloods. The idea of team play is to avoid detection by playing in a manner that doesn't look like you're counting cards. As we've seen time and again in these pages, the problem with a large bet spread is that there's the risk of it looking obvious to the well-trained casino employee. And if you're already an own card counter, that makes things even tougher. To throw casinos off his scent, one innovative card counter named Al Francesco pioneered team play. This involved having spotters betting small, then giving a visual or verbal signal to the big player that the table had a positive true count. The BP would swing into the table and bet big. From the casino's perspective, it looked like its pit was filled with a bunch of small players, while one big-time gambler was hopping from table to table and making only big bets. Both Sammy and Ben had been bits per second throughout Indiana, so the thought was that I would attract less attention as a BP than they might. While I was no rookie to betting large amounts at blackjack, the thought of being responsible for all the things a big player must do gave me butterflies. But I also wanted to master this skill and help our team finish the trip well. My teammates loaded up my pockets with $50,000 and headed into the casino several minutes before me, so that casino cameras wouldn't see us entering together. The main casino floor was pretty crowded, so the spotters set up at separate tables in a pit with $25 minimum tables or higher. As soon as I arrived, I was already getting a signal from Jeff. No time to think, I approached the table and asked the other players, "How's this table been going?" As I bought in for $1,000, Jeff alerted me to the running count. I quickly calculated the true count, which called for 2 spots of $500. The other guy at the table looked like he'd been having a rough night at the casino and said to me, "Hey, man, I'm trying to get my money back. Can you sit out until the next shoe?" I wasn't prepared for that, but I also knew that I had a true two. He's here to lose money and I'm here to make money. I can't start my BP career by sitting out at a true two, I told myself. "That's okay," I replied. "I'll play 2 spots." as if that would be some sort of magical solution to his losing streak. Jeff played a couple more rounds with me, but as the true count continued to climb, he muttered, "This table is no good for me. I'm going to try that table," and left to start spotting an adjacent table. My shoe ended and I saw that I was already getting caught into another table across the pit. I grabbed my chips and hurried over, trying to look as natural as possible, like I was having a good time. Life was certainly easier when I was the spotter invisible to surveillance, the pit, and other gamblers. Now I was a 24-year-old kid jumping around the pit betting thousands of dollars. My heart was pounding and my feet were sore from all the standing. I promised myself I would wear comfortable shoes next time. But then I reminded myself that 7 months ago, I was making $75 a day babysitting high schoolers in a French class. I don't speak a word of French. Now I was on a blackjack team generating $1,000 an hour, doing what I'd only read about in books. I need a phrase. I remembered hearing a hilarious story about a BP who carried around a fanny pack full of $500 and $1,000 chips. Whenever he was dealt an ace as his first card, he started chanting ace paint. Ace paint. Paint means any face card, since there's an extra coloring on the face cards. A minute later, I was at Ben's table, betting 2 spots of $2,000, a double down and a split came my way, so I had $8,000 on the table against the dealer's 6. Dealer bust time. I blurted out. The dealer promptly busted and the table went wild. I'd officially found my phrase. I also found out that 2 of the guys whose table I jumped into a half dozen times were pitchers for the Atlanta Braves. The Braves were in Milwaukee for a 4-game series with the Brewers. Their game was over for the day and neither of the 2 was scheduled to pitch the next day, so they were blowing off steam at the casino betting $25 to $50 a hand. Meanwhile some kid kept jumping into their table betting up to $4,000 a round, yelling, "Dealer bust time." We played until it was getting light outside. I was up $16,000 and feeling on top of the world. It went well for my first time as BP. But there was a lot that had to go just tried to pull it off. Proper playing conditions. First off, you need a shoe game. If you try to employ team play on a single or double deck, the big player will be entering and exiting every couple of hands. With a 6 or 8 deck shoe, you tend to get positive counts for longer stretches of time. Secondly, the big player needs to jump into tables in the middle of the shoe. Some casinos, Atlantic cities in particular, employ a no mid-shoe entry rule, rendering the whole spotter, BP routine impossible. Third, without enough tables, it won't work. With 3 spotters and a big player, we wanted at least 4 playable tables, though we would have preferred more. That way, you never have a spotter just standing around. He can always be spotting for another table. In addition, the tables can't be too crowded. There has to be room for the spotter, as well as a spot or 2 for the big player to enter the game. Ideally, if the count is high enough, soon after the big player sits down, the spotter will move to another table to keep ahead of the BP and not eat up valuable cards. Finally, you need signals, inconspicuous gestures the spotters use to summon the big player to their table. I don't want to divulge our team's exact signals, but suffice it to say that I could easily see from across the pit if a spotter had a positive shoe or not. If you put a little thought into it, I'm sure you can come up with something that looks natural to surveillance, but is obvious enough for the big player to notice from 10 yards away. Being an EI diaresis negation active spotter. Being a spotter sounds like a nice easy role to play. You don't draw any attention and you don't have to place the big bets. You mostly just sit there and play low limit blackjack. Beyond playing perfect basic strategy, counting down the decks, and making accurate true count conversions, however, an effective spotter needs enough additional skills to do the job. It's no simple task. The spotter's first task is scouting tables, which offer the best rules and deck penetration. As I mentioned before, you don't want to spot at a full table. There has to be room for the BP to get in. And since rounds per hour is an important consideration, a table with as few other players as possible is always preferable. At an empty table, you can try to play heads up as quickly as possible until you reach a good count. At a table with 1 or 2 players, you might not even have to sit down. You can simply stand behind the table, count it down, then signal the BP over when the count warrants it. Another skill that we mastered was stalling the table. If you're spotting a table that's reached that glorious true 1, but your BP is across the pit, or even worse, in another positive shoe, the whole team loses out on all that valuable EV at your table. As spotters, we considered it our duty to slow that table down until the BP could get there. If you're back counting, this can be done by simply asking the dealer a bunch of questions. Hey, is this blackjack? How much do I have to bet to play at this table? If I get a blackjack, do I get paid extra? How many decks do you guys use? Like 10? What's insurance? How does it work? Wait, can you explain that again? How does this side bet work? You need to look like you're ready to start playing or else the dealer will keep dealing. If you're already playing at the table, you can ask some of the same questions, but it's also a great time to buy in for a little more or color up your chips. Can I get half green, half red, and some white chips. And when it's your playing decision, just take as long as possible to act. Stalling the table for 30 seconds could save 3 positive hands for your BP. That night in Wisconsin, given the amount we were betting, at a true 4 we were making an extra $180 in EV. You don't want your BP missing out on money like that if at all possible. Once your BP arrives, he has to know the count immediately, whether you pass it to him verbally or visually. The spotter must not freeze. One of the most awkward situations imaginable occurs when a BP arrives at the table with a handful of chips, ready to fire it up, and the spotter doesn't clearly communicate the count. BP, hey, how's this table going? Spotter, inaudible muttering. BP, with a handful of chips on the betting circle. Let me think about how much I want to bet here. What do you guys think? Spotter, a broken bar. BP, so, this table been good? If you use a visual signal for the count, make sure it's obvious to the BP. The problem with a visual signal is that it might also be obvious to the eye in the sky. I'll let you decide which visual signals look natural and are obvious enough to the BP without tipping off surveillance. If you use a verbal signal, it has to be passed loud enough for the BP to hear. Whispering is more conspicuous than blurting out a short phrase. And if the BP doesn't hear you, you create an even more awkward and suspicious situation than saying a random sounding phrase out loud. It's common for a newer spotter to flub passing the count verbally. If you're nervous that you'll stand out, the next time you're in a casino, pay attention to how much random chatter you hear at the tables. You won't be the only person talking out loud every so often. Also, make sure you talk at times when the BP isn't at the table. If it seems that you've taken a vow of silence at the table while spotting, then become a chatty Cathy once the BP is standing there. It will seem a lot more odd than if you make comments periodically to the other players at the table. Heck, no one needs to even know that you're talking to the BP when you pass the count. Finally, spend some time practicing passing the count. You can do this before you attempt team play. Just go to a casino and practice coming up with short phrases that pass along the number, even though the BP isn't there. Just like every other skill, it gets a lot easier with practice. Leaving the table after finding a good table, calling the BP over to it, and communicating the count. A spotter should be able to do one more task well: get to a new table. Every hand you play once the BP has arrived costs you money. For one thing, you're eating up valuable cards at a small bet, when they could be conserved for the BP. Furthermore, the BP can take over the card counting at that table now, and you could be hawking another table until it goes into positive count territory. I wouldn't leave the table at a true 1, but if it gets above a true 2 with more than a deck left to be dealt, it's a good idea to exit and start spotting a new table. Being an eidiaresis negation active big player, having success as a big player requires a particular set of skills and responsibilities. Beyond the expected card counting know-how, the BP also must be able to skillfully and efficiently handle several playing situations from moment to moment. For this reason, I don't recommend you try playing the role of BP until you've logged several hundred hours as a successful card counter. When you're ready for it, here's what you need to consider. Create your own call-ins. The first skill you need to develop is creating your own call-ins. To limit the inefficiency of team play, we didn't want our BP just standing around when none of the spotters had a table for him. Instead, we expected the BP to create his own call-ins by back-counting and wonging in. While this skill isn't very difficult, it takes hustle and multitasking to count at the same time as watching for signals, which brings me to the BP's second skill. Keep your head up. A BP needs to have complete casino awareness. This means monitoring any number of simultaneous activities, which can seem overwhelming at first. You have to know where your spotters are, stay alert to being called into another table, and hustle there as soon as you can, and monitor the heat in the pit, all the while counting and playing perfectly. It all starts with making sure you're paying close attention, but it also takes some practice. Be ready to move since your table can go cold and a spotter might call you into another table at any time. You need to be prepared to move at a moment's notice. This can be really awkward if you get too comfortable at a table. For that reason, I never liked to sit as the BP. I wanted my body language to represent to the casino that I didn't like or plan to remain at any table for long. That way, I didn't feel awkward just walking off to another table or jumping back and forth. Well, that's not completely true. Nearly everything we do as card counters is awkward. Our goal is first, minimize the awkwardness, and second, accept and get accustomed to the awkwardness that's there anyway. Be prepared for the questions when you're a spotter. It's pretty easy to fly under the radar. The other players, dealer, and pit don't really care about you. But when you're zigzagging across the casino floor dropping hundreds or thousands of dollars, people want to know all about you. What do you do for work? What are you in town for? Do you play here often? That's a lot of money. You must be pretty good at blackjack. How do you handle the questions? Maybe the easiest answer is to say something like, to be honest, I don't really feel like talking about work. That tends to end the conversation, though it can put people on the defensive. I didn't feel comfortable lying, so I would say things that were technically true, but also tended to end the conversation. I work for myself. My family owns real estate. I'm in town with some buddies. Then, after you deal with the first line of questioning, you need to be prepared for the follow-ups. Personally, I don't like to get too chatty about myself. It's hard enough playing perfect blackjack without having to carry on conversations, not to mention the fact that I might be leaving that table at any second. Also, in the heat of the moment, it's easy to say too much, including something that might come back to haunt you later. On the other hand, I do enjoy being respectful and personable. I like to look the pit boss, dealers, and floor supervisor in the eyes and treat them the way I would want to be treated. But I'm not looking to share or hear anyone's life story. I've got high stakes work to do. BP mastery on the Washington Youngbloods. We were all willing to be the big player, but Jeff seemed to carry that responsibility most often. Maybe it was because he came from an upper-class family in Orange County, California, that he seemed to carry himself well and look the part. Or maybe it was because, at 24 years old, he could pass as a 30-something executive. Whatever the reason, he was voted the BP before we arrived at one particular casino outside of Phoenix, Arizona. Ben, Sammy, and I entered the casino first, to get set up as spotters. It was a mid-sized tribal casino with a pit of table games near the entrance. On a Thursday afternoon they had 5 blackjack tables open, likely gearing up for the busy weekend. It was still early enough that the tables were mostly empty, perfect conditions for team play. Each of us spotters sat at a different table, working on getting the count to a true 1.5. Jeff entered the casino. He found another table to stand behind and back out. As soon as Sammy had a call in, Jeff briskly walked over, received Sammy's verbal signal, and placed his bets. As the count reached a true 3, Sammy excused himself from the table and began playing an empty table across the pit. Ben and I both had positive true counts going by now, but Jeff was still busy at his current table. I asked my dealer if she shuffled the cards when the table emptied. "Yep," she replied. "That's no good. I don't want her to shuffle the cards. But I also don't want to keep playing and wasting this positive true count." I began asking her questions to stall the table. I looked across the pit and saw that Ben was standing up at his table, but with one hand on his seat, pretending to talk on his phone. Brilliant. That will stall the table, but keep the dealer from shuffling. I stood and told the dealer I needed to check my messages. I put my phone to my ear and placed one hand on my chair like Ben. Before long, Jeff had made his way to Ben's table. Ben managed to pass the count to Jeff while on a call. Jeff took over Ben's table. Ben walked over to a new table, ended his call, and started spotting. Jeff's table must have immediately gone cold, because he was now on his way to my table. As soon as he arrived, I made a comment to the dealer about leaving, which included a word or phrase that communicated the running count to Jeff. Jeff took over the table and I moseyed over to a new table. This went on for hours. Spotters played until a true 1.5. Then stood behind the table waiting for Jeff to arrive. To me, it was the most obvious play in the world. But an oblivious casino had no reason to connect Jeff to the rest of us. This may have been the most extreme example I ever experienced, but all the principles of effective team play were employed every time we used it in a casino. Problems with team play. Based on what I've shared, not to mention Hollywood's portrayal of card counting, you might still be thinking that team play is my preferred way of attacking casinos. In the movie 21, the only time things go awry is when the BP loses his cool and gets emotional. While that's definitely contrary to the disciplined investor approach, it's not the only way team play can go wrong. We encountered several problems with team play, and the longer I ran teams, the more team play became the exception, rather than the preferred way of attacking the tables. To me, it's a tool in a card counter's tool belt, but when that's used only under the right circumstances. Here's why. Miscommunication. I'm still embarrassed about this one, and for good reason. I was back counting a table as a spotter when the count plummeted. No other table was worth counting at the moment, so I stayed there. Sammy, the BP, walked by and I signaled that the count was -12. Unfortunately, he missed the negative part. He stepped up to the table and put down 2 $1,000 bets before I could stop him. Of course, the dealer drew a 21 and we lost the $2,000. I finally got his attention and made clear that it was a negative count. Blowing any form of cover, he yelled at me, "Why the F. Dollar did you pass me a negative count?" It was a costly error, but one from which I learned never to pass a negative count. The BP only needs to know when a table is positive. Moreover, this experience illustrates just how easy it is to miscommunicate during team play. Best case scenario, you miss out on F because the BP doesn't see you or hear you. Worst case, you cost yourself a lot of money by making mistakes from a breakdown in communication. Ein Ideasis negation efficiency. The biggest inefficiency of team play is the fact that multiple people are doing what one person can do. This can be mitigated by I sense requiring the spotters to stall the tables until the BP arrives. A sense leaving the table as soon as the BP takes over. A sense having the BP create his or her own call-ins. At times, Multiple tables will have a positive count. The big player can't take advantage of all of them at the same time, and you just can't stall the table any longer. In Don Schlissinger's book, Blackjack Attack, he cites a 76% increase in total EV when using one spotter and one BP. When the BP performs his own call-ins, of course, a second spotter brings another 56% increase in total EV, and even less with the third spotter, an additional 40%, for 172% more of than what one player could do on his or her own. Even if you're taking steps to mitigate the loss in EV, see the next section, you're actually generating a lot less EV than just splitting up and playing separately. It's worth considering this cost before assuming that team play is the way to go. If you use 4 players to generate 272% of the EV that one player can, you might not be doing your team any favors. After all, if it takes 4 players to do it, each person is generating only 68%, 272/4, on their own. One alternative is to split up and play separately, betting 70% less to avoid heat. In the end, you'll be making the same, or even more, money. Team cover can back each step taken to mitigate the loss of EV from team play runs the risk of tipping off the casino to what you're doing. For example, when both the spotters and the bits per second are bouncing around the pit like pinballs, it can draw unwanted attention from the pit crew or surveillance. It was common among newer players on the church team to join up with Loudon, often our most successful and notorious player, for a trip to Las Vegas to employ team play. It seemed like a perfect fit. Loudon played the lower roller unrated spotter, thus avoiding heat. The new face acted as the BP, using his fresh ID to get big bets out, and the corresponding higher roller comps. Initially, it worked like a charm, but it didn't take long for surveillance to figure it out after reviewing the tapes. While the BP wasn't known as a counter and wasn't playing like one, surveillance noticed the same guy at every table the BP landed at. That guy quickly got up and went to another table. This, of course, was happening over and over. Once they took a closer look, they recognized Loudon. In one particular session, the BP didn't get backed off, but the spotter, Loudon, disguised as a cowboy, no less, sure did. Casinos can overreact. Hell hath no fury like a casino getting ganged upon. On the church team, we played fairly high limits, up to $6,000/round. Those kind of limits resulted in no shortage of backups. They just went with the territory. With the church team, we discovered that if we went to Las Vegas and played solo, back counting and wonging in or sitting and spreading our bets, on occasion we were shown the door. However, when the casino figured out our team play, the stakes escalated and we regularly got flyered. Apparently, the casino felt even more threatened by team play than by solo play. Angry surveillance manager: look at these guys. They're organized, working as a team. They think they can come in here and beat us with their brains? I don't think so. Send an email to every other casino in Las Vegas warning them about these guys. Don't get paranoid. The flyers and or emails are usually tossed into the trash after a few days, but it sure can ruin a 4-day trip. For the reasons outlined above, the vast majority of what we did on the church team was good old-fashioned card counting. We planned plenty of trips in groups of 2 or 3, but that was mostly just to have someone to share a meal with at the end, or beginning, of a day full of solo play at different casinos. Grace the Gorilla, my wife, and I sit down at a $100 minimum table at MGM Grand, and Grace bets 2 spots of $200. The rules of this game are exceptional, so I've calculated a fairly inconspicuous bet spread that's still worth $700 per hour. Grace: excuse me, sir, is there any chance we can get tickets to the fight tonight? She hands him her player's card. Pit boss: I'm sorry, Mrs. Jones, but it's a championship fight and completely sold out. Grace: that's too bad. She turns to me and says, maybe after this shoe, we should go back to the win. Pit boss: let me get you a meal set up in one of our fine dining restaurants. The count heats up to a true 1. Okay, but let's win a few hands first. Grace hears the code word, win, and raises her bets to 2 spots of $400. She plays a few rounds, losing a couple $1,000, and buys in for more. Now the count is a true 2. I could use a drink. Grace hears the code word, drink, and raises her bets again, to 2 spots of $800. Grace turns to the pit boss again. Are you sure there's nothing you can do to get us into the fight tonight? Pit boss: Grace, let me call your host again and see if there's anything he can do. After a few more rounds, she's down $8,000 and buying in again, as the count has reached a true 4, calling for her top bet. I hope you get your money back. Grace hears the code word, money, and with shaking hands places 2 bets of $1,200. Grace: alright, how about some good cards? After this shoe, we might as well head back to the win. A minute later, the host arrives. It's amazing how hard they are to find when you're winning and how quickly they arrive when you're losing. 70-year-old Vegas pit boss: hi, Grace, I was able to work something out. We've got 2 tickets to the fight for you. They aren't ringside, but they're on the floor level, about 8 rows back. Grace, great. That's perfect. Thanks, host. I hope it turns around for you, and that you keep playing here at MGM Grand. Let me know if you need anything else. Grace, how about tickets to the nightclub? Host, sure thing. You'll be on the VIP list. After the host makes his exit, she gets back to playing the hot shoe. She's dealt a soft 19 and a pair of 10s against a dealer's 5. 2 deviation hands. I'd double the soft 19 if it were me. She doubles, catching another 10 for a hard 19. You might as well split those 10s. That's the only way you'll get your money back. Grace, I'd like to split my 10s. Pit boss, are you sure? That's a lot of money. Grace, hey, I'm here to gamble. She gets an 8 on the first hand, then a 10 on the second. She splits one more time, receiving a 2 and a 9. The dealer flips a 10 for the whole card, then hits it with a 7 for 22. Everyone is cheering and high-fiving. I know we need to finish the shoe and exit stage left. After a couple more hands, the cut card comes out and I give Grace the signal that it's time to get our seats for the fight. As she colors up, I do some quick calculations. Not only did she win back the $8,000 she bought in with, but is up another $4,000. We're ahead $23,000 for the weekend and are about to enjoy an evening we would never have paid for with our own money. As we walk toward the MGM Grand Garden Arena, I ask her, what was the deal with the nightclub comp? She replies, I've never been to a nightclub. I thought it would be fun to check it out. We watched the entire fight night from about 20 yards away. Neither of us is a boxing fan, so we don't even know who Juan Manuel Dinamita Marquez and Michael the Great Katsidis are, but later we learn that some experts consider it the best boxing match of 2010. The atmosphere is electric, so we enjoy the entire experience. After the fight, we check out the nightclub, but as 2 boring Christian parents with young kids, we realize within minutes that it's not our scene. At least we can check it off of Grace's bucket list. My wife had absolutely zero interest in learning how to play blackjack. She occasionally accompanied me on trips, including an epic cross-country road trip from Atlantic City back to our home in the Seattle area. She sat at the table with me and made small talk with the dealer, pit boss, or gamblers, but she had no interest in doing more than that. Then we started having kids. The thought of a paid vacation filled with comps and, most importantly, no kids, started sounding increasingly appealing to her. She still had no interest in becoming a full-blown card counter, so we devised a plan. The original team that trained Ben was famous for creating what they called gorilla bits per second. The term originally came from Ken Ustin's books describing a style of play developed by Al Francesco. A gorilla BP knew how to play perfect basic strategy and memorized what the playing deviations meant, though not the index numbers. So instead of the BP having to count and calculate the true count, the spotter stayed at the table, signaling what to bet each round. As mentioned above, this is much less efficient than if the BP is also a card counter. But the benefit was that they could bring a gorilla BP up to speed much more quickly than they could train a full-blown card counter. You can read more about how this team operated in Josh Axelrod's book, Repeat Until Rich. Turning Grace into a gorilla BP was a good move for us and a great one for her. I essentially started an entirely new career at all the top games in Las Vegas, rated, of course. She got romantic getaways with yours truly, enjoying the comped rooms, show tickets, and fine dining without even having to learn to count. She practiced basic strategy for hours each day until she never made mistakes. I tested her out and we practiced at low-limit tables before planning a trip to Las Vegas. For me, it was the most challenging card counting I've ever done. I had to count, signal betting decisions to her, and think through any deviation decisions faster than she could play basic strategy. If I hadn't played thousands of hours as a card counter and trained so many other card counters, I don't think I could have pulled it off. If you'd like to try on Gorilla BP play for size, here are a few pieces of critical advice. Go one step further than training gorilla bits per second at basic strategy and train them to be aware of all deviation hands. That way, the BP will know to pause until he or she receives a signal. Grace knew to pause for certain hands, but I took full responsibility for those decisions. Again, thinking through decisions faster than she could play basic strategy was insane. I wouldn't do it that way again, which is why I suggest your BP should know when to wait. Practice, practice, practice if you ever want to try this. It's like spotter, BP play on speed. If you don't perfect this at home and at low stakes tables, you'll cost yourself some serious EV. Make sure the gorilla BP is comfortable handling big money and a lot of chips. Grace's hands shook at times and she made a few improper bets in the beginning, but she definitely had the temperament to handle the stakes. Plus, she'd sat at the table with me for years while I'd placed thousands, even tens of thousands, of dollars on the felt. If you want to turn your friend or girlfriend into a gorilla BP, but she hasn't been responsible for that kind of money or stress before, it could quickly become a horrendous mistake. Be aware of the cost. My wife and I were doing what I could have done on my own. The reason it made sense was that I couldn't get away with those stakes at those casinos, while Grace couldn't count at all. If two card counters are considering doing this, I'd say don't bother. You're better off just splitting up and betting half as much to avoid the heat of high limits. You'll end up making the same EV, while getting to the long run twice as fast. Our plan worked masterfully for 4 trips to Las Vegas. Grace worked really hard, motivated by the comps that came along with getting in the hours. I was motivated to help our team close a bankroll. We put in long hours, then enjoyed the comps at the end of the day. For her career, Grace won $30,000 for the church team. But on the last night of our 4th trip, someone in surveillance must have recognized me. Even though I wore a hat and never played a hand, an alert surveillance agent put 2 and 2 together. That night, we both got backed off from MGM Grand, Wynn, Caesars Palace, and Mandalay Bay. The church team disbanded soon afterward, and Grace the Gorilla has been in hibernation ever since. Reactions on what made the church team special: a broken bar and why it ended. I've put a lot of thought into what made the church team work. I wish I could say it was all my doing, but it wasn't. Several factors resulted in the team being healthy, only a few of which had anything to do with me. On the other hand, and to be perfectly honest, some of the factors that resulted in the team disbanding were because of my shortcomings. In my reflecting, I've come to see 3 elements that led to our success and would likely guarantee the success of any other major team or business: exceptional people, high standards, and a healthy structure. Exceptional people: Steve Jobs, Richard Branson, Larry Page, and many other famous founders understand that a business is only as successful as the people working within it. I believe we were incredibly fortunate to attract and retain our core group of players on the church team. Not only was a relatively small group of people responsible for most of our profits, but these 6 or 7 players were the heart and soul of the team. They trained hard, worked hard, and had one another's backs. I've come to believe that any sustainable business needs more than one bottom line. If money is the only bottom line, it won't last. I've seen this time and time again with blackjack teams. A group of people team up, but their only bond is a desire to take money out of casinos. Before long, the ups and downs, egos and personality conflicts, and different goals result in the team disbanding. We were highly fortunate that our core group of players really enjoyed working together and enjoyed one another. Because of that, they were invested in the team more than for the simple finances. They infused their own money into the bankroll, put in the hours at the tables, and enjoyed hanging out together outside the casinos. Replicating that group of people, at that season in our lives, wouldn't be easy. High standards: the church team wouldn't have been what it was without the playing standards we learned from the MIT teams, the Greeks, and the Highlanders. And if I had to or could do anything over with the church team, I would have set even higher standards. The quality players would have risen to the occasion, making them even better at generating EV, while we likely would have saved the team from many of the losses that came our way as a result of poor play. Our test out involved 3 phases, counting down 2 or 3 shoes at team headquarters, with a maximum of being off on the count by a running 1 per shoe and no basic strategy, deviation, or betting mistakes. An indefinite in-casino test out where we watched the player in action for as long as it took to feel comfortable handing him or her team money, and 48 hours at lower limit play, followed by a retest. At that point, we continued to test our players regularly to make sure their game stayed at a high level. Again, I think this is a minimum requirement and players should be comfortable being retested regularly. Healthy structure: you can have the best intentions, but without the proper structure, accountability, and motivation, you'll likely fail. As I mentioned, the one thing necessary for a healthy team structure is that everyone is motivated to be at their best. One rule we settled on early was that players were welcome to go off on their own at any time. Whenever players told us that they were thinking of taking the skills we taught them to strike it off on their own, we said, "Great, go for it." While that wasn't my first instinct, Ben convinced me of the wisdom behind this strategy. The problem with making players sign a non-compete is that you may end up in a situation where they're playing for you only because they have to. When motivation to be at their best is essential for your success, you don't want disgruntled team members. So if players could succeed without us, why would we hold them back? Then, if they realized they were better off as a part of our team than being on their own, we knew that they wanted to play for our team. I've talked to other people who have run large-scale blackjack teams, and when they said their players were griping about the management fee, I said, let them go. If you're worth it, they'll come back. Through trial and error, we also managed to find a healthy payment structure that worked for us. Players were paid an amount up front, but the majority of their pay came at the back end. This meant that players could pay the bills with their upfront pay, but that they were primarily motivated by the results of the team. It took us a long time to figure it out, but it was the right financial incentivization for our team. Players were also motivated by their financial investment in the team, the bonuses we created, and simply by the culture of enjoyment involved in beating the casinos. Without arriving at forms of motivation that worked for us, we simply couldn't have achieved the successes that we did. We put several other structural systems in place, like a trip planner who helped new players execute successful trips as they got going. We also created a bit of a buddy system for new players, sending them out with a more seasoned player. This saved our newer players from making the most common rookie mistakes. It also provided a kind of call to duty for new players, so when a rookie was stressed out and unsure what to do, the seasoned player was there to say, "Here we go. We're starting at Casino A, then hitting Casinos B, C, and D, before getting some dinner. After dinner, it's on to Casino E. By then, since it'll be a new shift, we will circle back through Casinos A through D before calling it a night." This kind of game plan, along with things like Phone a Friend, our team form, and quarterly debriefs with management helped our players be at their best. A lot of people wondered how we trusted that the players weren't stealing and managed a situation that might have been too risky. Sure, there were risks involved, but they all felt like they were worth taking, relative to the opportunities. And though it required a large amount of faith that the players would always act with integrity, at the end of the day, I did trust the people I played blackjack with. What caused it to end? The biggest factor in deciding to shut down the church team was my inability to find new players, which went hand in hand with a lack of passion for looking for them. As I said, we had a really great group of initial players, but as the team ran its course, I wasn't proactively looking for new players. I felt better about letting the team come to an end than having to reboot with a whole new cast of characters. Secondly, I think my age and immaturity hurt the team. On several occasions, I waited too long to let players go who weren't a good fit. I was still in my 20s, with 3 small children, and didn't have the management and leadership skills to keep the team moving, while also focusing on my young family. I don't regret running the team, but I can look back and see that a more mature Colin would have done things differently. Finally, I think the team lost the inspiration it had in the first couple of years. A fascinating book called Predictable Success explains the life cycle of a business. In it, author LeviMich explains that if a business moves beyond the learning, experimenting, and growing stage and settles into a maintenance mode, it's just a matter of time before it dies out. By not adding new players or trying new things, I think the team lost the inspiration and excitement that fueled it those first couple of years. If I had it to do over, I'd invest more in my personal, business, and management skills while running the team. In all, the church team was a huge success. The people, stories, and profits are something I'll always be thankful for. If you end up starting or running a team, hopefully you can learn from our experience. While on a trip with Grace, I recognized Pau Gasol and Sasha Vuja Diaricisia at the Mirage. At the time, both were playing for the LA Lakers. My brother, a huge Lakers fan, claims this is his proudest moment of me. For reference, I'm 6'2" and 180 pounds, yet they still towered over me. From micro stakes to pro LeviMich. How did you become interested in card counting? I was gambling on blackjack for fun. Then I watched the movie 21 and found out from Google that it was really possible to count cards. How did you train? I used the BJA app and played until I stopped making mistakes. I also bought a deck of cards and dealt to myself while counting and had friends deal to me. What were you doing for work at the time? I was working at Tim Hortons, a fast food co-dialysis negation e-shop. What was your starting bankroll? My starting bankroll was $1,500 of credit. Working part-time for minimum wage, I couldn't really save any money I made. I figured I'd take a chance at making $7 an hour with a little higher risk. When did you decide to quit your day job? I quit my job when someone reached out to me wanting to start a team with $10,000. My EV on the available games was 30 to 40 an hour and I got a percentage of that. Way better than 6 to 7 an hour, even after taxes. What did your friends and family think? Most thought it was a terrible idea or that I was going down a dark and dangerous path. A couple of friends were supportive and trained and learned with me. It wasn't until I started making money over many hours of playing that everyone began to realize it was a real thing. When did you team up with Spartan? What was that like? I teamed up with Spartan about 3 to 6 months after going full-time. It was nice, because our personalities complement each other. I'm creative and come up with a lot of ideas, but I'm pretty unorganized sometimes. Spartan is very organized and technologically inclined. With those two things together, we've made a great team. What has been your goal or motivation? At RST, it was the excitement of the lifestyle and beating the casino. Now it's pretty much just for the money. I still love it deep down, but after so long, it kind of becomes the grind. I get to live an awesome lifestyle, so I'd innately appreciate it and wouldn't be able to do that any other way. Have you managed to make a living as an AP? Yes, I went from making minimum wage to making a 6-figure income in only a couple of years. It also opened up doors to other investments and opportunities. Any lessons you'd like to share from your time as an AP? Work with people you like and work well with. Keep your close friends close and don't be too quick to trust everyone you meet. No matter how much they may know, reach out to people and network many times. It will save you from having to learn things the hard way. Take time to really perfect your craft and be patient when it comes to seeing results. Keep an F-based mindset, focusing on the long term, and don't be discouraged if things seem bad in the short term. If you're doing the right thing long enough and managing it well, it will pay. Oidiasis negation.